Hello, everybody, and welcome to the DevEd Podcast. Today on our panel, we have, as always, the wonderful Luis Hernandez.
Hola.
And Brooke Avery.
Hey, everybody.
A few of our regular panelists are out, but we have a couple of very awesome and special guests. First, we have Sarah Jorgensen.
Aloha.
And we have Chris Savaleja.
Hey, how's it going?
I had to take lessons to pronounce it the way that he pronounces it. We worked for like 5 minutes together. So before we get started, we got to introduce our two new guests. Sarah, do you want to start off and tell us, first off, I want to know why your profile has Kapehe Jorgensen on it and not Sarah Jorgensen?
So Sarah is also my name, but Kapehe is also my other name. Kapehe Okalani is my middle name. I go by Kapehe. And yeah.
Wow. So you have like Islander ancestry going on in there? Yeah.
So my mom's from Hawaii. My dad's from Colorado. So that's where the two very different names come into play.
Right. How does a Hawaiian and a Coloradan end up together?
He went over there. He found her. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that is beautiful. I like that. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I work for Auth0, an identity as a service provider. We handle the login credentials for developers if they use our product. And one of our big customers, my proudest one, is IKEA. So when you log in and order stuff on IKEA, we're taking care of that authentication. I went to Dev Mountain in 2017. I graduated December of that year. And I started working for a local startup in Henderson, so on the other side of town from me. And I was a full stack software developer, and now I work for Auth0. And I love it. Writing technical blog posts.
Awesome. So you live in the Las Vegas area?
Yeah, so I'm on the west side. I live in Summerlin. Yeah, I love it.
Super cool. Can you get a IKEA to write better instructions? Can you put that suggestion in there?
The little guy on the paper is so goofy to me.
My wife loves building their stuff. I always get too confused and break everything. Chris, how about you?
So I run a website called Scotch.io. I've had it for about 5 years now and been developing for 16 about. And Scotch has been a side project for about 5 years. And finally this year I was able to turn the key and go full time on it. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And
tell us about Scotch.
Sure. We do web development tutorials similar to Thinkster, I would say. And we like to focus on more of the why instead of the how, and like, why are we doing the things that we're doing instead of, hey, just copy this code and paste this code. So that's kind of where we fall in, and we do like a lot of, I guess, practical tutorials is where we focus. But yeah.
Sweet. So finally going full time this last year. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
That's awesome. It's nice to be able to spend time doing what you prefer to be doing, right? I've heard it from people that have gone full time, but I never actually thought it was like a real thing. But the context switching of doing your day job and then switching to your side project, it takes so much out of you. And you're like, oh, it's such a simple thing, but it's such a drainer. And I guess that's what they say about meetings, right? It's like so hard you don't just have a meeting and then go straight back to being productive. You have that like lull time between the tasks. Right. Cool. So our topic for today's episode is what to learn in 2019. And here it is, the end of May when we're recording this. It's going to be out in sometime in June. So we're already halfway through the year. So this episode could be half as long as a normal episode because you only have half a year left. But no, obviously it's a topic that is useful regardless of the time of year. Traditionally, people do these like at the beginning or end of the years. But we only started recording our podcast a few months ago and finally got around to this topic. And since we are focused on developer education, it's a good topic to have, which is more topical based, what kinds of things we should be learning. But before we really get into like specific topics, things that people think we should be looking at learning in 2019, I actually want to kind of take a step back and start thinking about just
looking at what to learn as a developer from a higher level and in general. So a good question really to start off with is why should you be worried about something that's very temporal based, right? Like when we're talking about what to learn in 2019, obviously we're talking about things that are probably fairly specific, maybe more recent. So why should we worry about learning things that are relatively temporal or even keeping up at all, right? With changes in our industry. Thoughts from the panel. We can just go around, whoever wants to chip in with an answer for this.
I'll throw in to start. It's a very good question because, I mean, the question was posed before we started this, what to learn in 2019, right? And I personally have gotten to a point this year where I'm so jaded by all the changes. And I don't know, you're in development long enough, you know how the cycles go, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, my answer was going to be, well, one of my answers was going to be like, I think people should learn, like what to learn in 2019 is to learn to not follow every trend. It's such a hard thing to do. When I saw a great slide from, I wish I remembered his name, but it was, he started his slides with TDD, which we all know is test-driven development, but he actually changed his acronym. It was Twitter-driven development, where like whatever you find on Twitter is what you code with that day, you know?
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Twitter-driven development. I've heard resume-driven development, RDD.
Okay.
You learn the stuff that just looks good for the resume?
Yeah.
I like that, Twitter-driven development.
TDD.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm a little jaded. I would say, fundamentals are best and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I kind of second that. I think there's always something, new and kind of the fad thing to learn. But kind of like what Chris is saying, I think there's a lot that can pull your attention in so many different directions. And I kind of remember going through that myself, even just going through boot camp. It was, it's such people always compare going to boot camp like the fire hydrant, just shooting out all that water and you're trying to drink in all of it at once. But I feel like if you're not focused, even after boot camp, even after learning, that same kind of effect can happen if you're not careful, because there's so many cool things to be learning and you can easily get distracted by so many of them. But I think really, like, just pick your niche, pick what really interests you the most and really focus on mastering those skills and then start looking at some other things. But I really think it's just kind of time to go back to those, like, just go back to your home roots and really master those basics and the real fundamentals of things, and then start going off and just choose one thing at a time. Don't learn 20 things. Just pick one new thing, one new skill, master that, and then keep going.
Yeah, I completely agree. At my boot camp, we learned React, and we had 1 week of Angular just because they wanted us to be familiar with Angular. And then when I got into the industry, I thought, I need to know all these frameworks. I need to know Vue. I need to know React. I need to know Angular. And because of that, I felt like I wasn't able to become very good at one thing. And so I started focusing more on React. And then for my blog that I write for Auth0's blog, they want me to write more of the React stuff. And so I can become the React professional on my team. So I think it's important, to just focus on one thing, not get so bogged down by all the new things, but try and keep up as much as possible. So like Twitter, TDD.
I think that's an interesting point, because what you're saying, like with boot camp, is it's such a short amount of time and they try to cram so much into those 3 months or however long it is. Mm-hmm. But I almost wish that it would just be focused on one framework, because you get out into the real workforce and you haven't really mastered one concept. And I feel like you almost have to, after boot camp, it's like you have to go back and really just go back and focus on the very fundamentals, the very basics of one thing. But you really have to just choose that one area and focus on that before just feeling so scatterbrained with 5 different frameworks. Just pick one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I felt like when I left the boot camp, I didn't know JavaScript like I thought I did. And so I went into the world and JavaScript is crazy. And so that was the thing that I wanted to focus on a lot after my boot camp.
Luis, what about you? Why do you think people should be worried about keeping up and thinking about stuff that you should learn in the current year?
I don't know if I'm going to go about that far. My recommendation is find a project that interests you. I recommend that you don't come up with an idea first, that you take something that's out there that you think is really cool and you clone that, because that takes some of the mental load at designing and coming up with the idea at the same time that you're learning how to build it. And just try to build that. Pick a technology. And this is where I know that you mentioned boot camps, but any kind of educational institution is going to help you there. It could be college, a university, where they're going to just give you kind of this broad overview of what's out there, the different roles that you could assume as a developer or in your position, right? And then you pick the role that you like the most and you specialize in that. Some people like backend, some people like dealing with databases, so you go that way. If you like front end, go into the front end, go hard. And go into the industry and say which libraries are, the ones that are on top, the one that the community has embraced, and you will find them. They're always there. You could go and look at the surveys and learn one of those and concentrate on learning that. But my recommendation is build something with it. And then once you build it, if you want to try something else, build the same thing in that other library. And that's going to give you an idea of the effort or which library you enjoy the most. But definitely, I agree with everyone here when you said, stick to only one thing and get familiar with that first before you go into others. But just know this, by learning one, learning the second one is going to be a lot easier, because we learn best by when we have a context that we can relate our new knowledge to. So that will help you too. That's my advice. Instead of going after technologies first, go into something, build it, and then pick technologies for whatever it is that you're building.
I love that. I really like I'm a big fan of build it in like 3 different ways kind of thing, especially the Angular, Vue, React kind of world. Like just build it 3 ways, see which one you like, and then run with it, But yeah, I love the way that this talk is going as far as like moving to the fundamentals and moving towards like a style of learning rather than what to learn. Because like 2 weeks ago, what was it? I had like a whole week worth of work, and all of a sudden Svelte comes out, and there goes like my entire week messing around with Svelte, But yeah, I think we're all on the same page. If we did have to pick things to learn in 2019, I don't want to like cop out and not list anything.
We're going to get to that later in the episode.
Okay, cool. I'll just hang out then.
All right. So we talked a little bit about like bucking the trend. I think that might be something to focus on as FOMO, fear of missing out, right? There's so many things to learn, so many things that come out. There's always something new. Like you said, Svelte, boom, Svelte 3 drops, and everybody's talking about Svelte. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I don't know Svelte. I'm not going to have a job in a week because I don't know Svelte. Because Svelte 3 just came out. How do you, what techniques and tactics do you use to avoid that FOMO, that fear of missing out and the worry that I've got to learn every possible thing that just came out last week? Chris, you want to start us off?
Sure. And I thought about this a lot. I think we're all in a unique position that we have our own educational sites and stuff like that, where we kind of don't have that luxury to step aside. So I think it's unique in our perspective, but I always like to tell people to focus on just shipping like, and I don't mean shipping a full product, right? Like just getting your task out, like finishing whatever sprint you need to do and making sure that's done. And then after, if you want to play around with new stuff, then do that. So I don't know. I like saying focus on what you're building as opposed to TDD, I guess.
I like that. Focus on shipping. Sarah, what about you?
So after graduating from the boot camp, you definitely have that. There's so much pressure to know everything, and all your fellow cohort peers are finding other jobs and they're learning, in Angular, they're learning this, and you're like, I got to keep up with them. And it's a big struggle for boot camp grads or anyone, going into the workforce and feeling like you don't know anything. So I had to just tell myself, just relax. React is okay. Focus on that. Get good at that. Get good at JavaScript, and slowly incorporate things. So I feel like I've been able to handle the FOMO and not feel like I'm missing out so much.
Awesome. Luis, how about you? What's your thoughts on this?
It's a hard problem to solve. It's like imposter syndrome. I would say don't be afraid of it, because there is a place for, there's this spectrum, right? You could be somewhere along that spectrum. You could be on the fringe technologies, everything that's coming out, and you're the guy that's always experimenting with the girl. But there is this established technology, and this is where the bulk of the work is. And again, this doesn't mean that listeners are gonna go and not feel that anxiety of, I'm not learning that new thing that's coming out, I'm not learning this. But just know that there is more work out there, let's say on Angular JS, than there is on other libraries that you may think are most popular. And I'm talking about the old version of Angular, even more work on that than the newer version of Angular. So know that you're always going to find job there. And there's also the legacy stuff like jQuery that's still around. So just learn one. Make sure that you learn it good enough and you stick with it. And of course, it's a lot easier if you go out there and you're an employee in a company. If you have to come up with your project, it's a little harder because you have to choose the technology. But if you're an employee, it's easy. The easy answer is whatever your company needs, you go and learn that. So your focus should be now on learning how to learn. This is the best thing that you could do for yourself as a professional. So the idea of learn a technology, build a product, and then go build it in something else, it's going to help you with that. So how fast can I revamp on a new technology and build the same thing? That's where you should be focusing, not on learning particular technologies, but on how can I learn new technologies faster, get better at that.
In education, this is a really common problem because, like, as a teacher in a classroom, you have 30 students, and the poor teachers, this is where my heart sympathizes with teachers, because they're expected to get every student to meet a certain level. But what is particularly hard about that is that not every student comes in at the same level. You can have some students moving in from out of state or just from a different school or a different district. Maybe they didn't learn the same curriculum. And so you have to try to get all of your students, be they, starting way, way, way below, or maybe they're advanced, and you have to get them all above a certain level. And like what I'm trying to get to here is that I think what's more effective for those teachers isn't necessarily to look at, is each child, at that 4th grade level or 11th grade level. I think the focus should be more on, has this student progressed? Because when you start to compare students to where they, quote, should be or shouldn't be, I think that can actually be kind of depressing or saddening to a student. And they start to get really down and low and depressed on themselves. They don't feel like they're smart enough. They feel like they've failed and like they're not good enough. So they lose that motivation. But if you instead focus on, well, look at where you started. Where did you start before you started learning? And now look at where you are today. And you look at their progress over time. It's a lot more effective, and it helps their self-esteem. It helps their confidence. It keeps them motivated. And I think that's really, really important as adults too. There's nothing any different. Just because we're an adult, we're not in an actual classroom with a teacher. We shouldn't be looking at it any differently. If you want to stay motivated and learning, don't compare yourself to your classmates in boot camp. Don't compare yourself to your coworkers and, how much progress they've made and how quickly they've made it. You aren't coming from the exact same background that they did. You have no idea how much exposure they've already had to something, some kind of technology or framework. So don't hold it over your own head, because that's only going to hurt yourself. I think if you just look at, here's my progress where I started, this is where I want to go, I think that's so much more effective, and you're going to keep that motivation up. You're not going to be, feeling like such an imposter. Everybody talks about this imposter syndrome, but really just focus on your progress and don't compare yourself to other people.
That's great advice. Great advice. I think I'll chip in here a little bit with maybe not exact opposite opinion or counterpoint here, but one thing that I have seen a few times in my career is people who have gotten too complacent, right? And I'm talking like on the extreme end of complacency, people who've been doing some really old technology and they've been stuck in that for 5, 6, 7 years. And all of a sudden they get in this point where at their job, they haven't kept up on anything even remotely current. and they've lost what skills they had that were, a lot of skills are very relevant regardless of even if it's been 5 years. Like if you were doing C# 5 years ago, you're probably okay. Today, you could pick new stuff up, Java, even JavaScript, right? Although JavaScript does change a lot, the face changes, but at least the language, right? It's still essentially the same language, and you can pick up the new stuff quick. But when you're not practicing those skills, and you get those skills get really out of date, and the only thing you've been doing is a very niche technology that's fallen out of favor, especially when it's like company-specific technologies, which I've seen that a few times. And you get these people that get trapped in this job where they're getting very well paid, right? And they're happy, but they know the minute this project becomes obsolete, they can't move to something else. And they're potentially going to lose their job. And they might have to go back to like junior, mid-level developer positions. So just something to keep an eye out for is that we should always be spending some time learning. And whether it doesn't need to be about what came out last week, but at least an understanding of what is a relevant in-demand skill today, right? There's a reason why we don't worry about like how to use leeches in medicine anymore, as far as I know. But it's like that's an out-of-date thing. That's not keeping up to date anymore. Same thing with technology. We want to be at least spend some time understanding, are the skills that I have today, am I keeping up on them enough that if I lost my job, I would be able to get another job somewhere else and not have to take, a too significant of a pay cut? Or if I did, that I would, I'm arranging my life in that manner and know that at some point I will. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And rather than the fear of missing out, just instead have a healthy respect for keeping your skills up to date. So the next question I want to talk about is how to find things to learn, the important things to learn, right? Again, we're not moving into yet of what we should. We're saving that to the end. We're going to make everybody listen to the end of the podcast to find out what things they should learn in 2019. We're going to talk about other questions. So what are sources that you go to find things that are up to date, like what is important? What things should I be worried about potentially putting on my radar of stuff to learn? Sarah, you want to lead us off with this? We'll go the opposite direction, at least in my view, of left to right instead of right to left.
Yeah. So I think the number one place I found a lot of resources is Twitter, because people are constantly updating their Twitter and, putting on new CSS tricks or talking about Svelte, So I think Twitter is a great resource for finding new up and coming stuff, for sure.
Cool. Luis, what about you?
Yeah, I have a similar approach, only that I tend to follow some training sites. Like if you go into Thinkster, you see what is the new stuff that they're putting out. You have an idea where the industry is going, because those companies make it their business to understand what the industry needs. So if you go and see what is it that Thinkster is putting out, that's going to give you an idea. This is what probably some of the stuff that I should be learning or worrying about or have on my radar or for stuff to learn next. Of course, Twitter is also a good source.
I recently heard about this place called Scotch.io. You should totally check it out.
Yeah, I hear they have really, really nice tutorials. And they have this way of writing them that is like really, really friendly, and they have these nice articles where they even explain how they did the redesign some years ago and all that. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good site. They probably also are a good source of finding what's coming up.
Though he's kind of wonky.
He's wonky. That's a good word. Brooke, what about you?
Oh, I definitely agree with the Twitter. But I'm going to say any online community. So like dev.to, I think is good. Just where a lot of developers are meeting together, and kind of communicating in those online forums. But a couple of things I love to do. I have subscribed to a handful of different newsletters. So I'm constantly getting like almost daily updates on just current trends and things on topics that I want to focus on. And that's what I like about those newsletters is that I can choose, it's not just from, like we've already talked about, knowing 5 different frameworks probably isn't the best thing to do, but I can go and choose. Do I want to learn Vue? Do I want to learn React, Angular, whatever it is? And then sign up for a couple of newsletters from those like frameworks, those languages, and then you'll be getting updates from them. And then another idea also would just be to attend, like Louise was saying, go to some meetups. And, I think just being there in person with some people who are really in the industry and have their hands kind of in the thick of things, and just staying up to date with what they're doing and with what they're sharing with you. So definitely, yeah, meetups, and then like online communities and newsletters.
And Chris, you're up next.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter for sure. Newsletters is big for me. I agree. Especially like JavaScript Weekly, Web Designer Weekly, all those, I guess, bigger ones. They've gotten their following because they've been so reliable. Like I didn't even know about Svelte until I saw it on Twitter. Somebody was just doing like some comparison code and stuff like that. So that was fun. I wish I had like better sources, but newsletters and Twitter are pretty much my big ones. And what I've found recently, which is kind of terrifying to me, is Google News app is actually really good. So don't judge me, right? So we had this podcast coming up, and like I know what to talk about for 2019, but I was like, let's see what the industry thinks. So I just searched like, web development 2019 trends or whatever. And then like 2 hours later, Google News, there's like 5 articles of what's coming up in 2019. And I'm like, thanks, Google. I guess I wanted these.
For me, I totally identify with this. What's even scarier is when I have a conversation with somebody, my phone in my pocket, and all of a sudden stuff starts showing up on my Twitter feed or my news feed that's new. And like, is that coincidence? Because I'm pretty sure I've never searched that topic on Google. So what's going on?
Yeah, I've only spoken it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not even just Google News that gets it. It's like Instagram ads that get it.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I didn't know Google talked to Instagram.
Although what's awesome is when my wife's phone starts coming up with news articles on Angular. And like, she's never search that stuff, but she talks with me about it all the time. So I don't know. Big Brother is listening.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we need to refer to a good conspiracy theory podcast about that. I'll jump in with one other place that I think is a great place to get this sort of stuff, and that is conferences, right? So a lot of conference talks tend to be relatively up to date, people talking about things that are coming up or coming out or new techniques. So I think following conferences, looking at the videos that come out from conferences and attending conferences is a great place to stay, to find out what things to learn. So let's go to our next question here. Once you've heard about things to learn, how do you choose what to learn? What are the criteria that you use to choose what to learn? Luis, you get to start us off.
The criteria.
Yeah, you got finite time, my friend. I know you think you can meth is the answer and it gives you a whole bunch of extra time, but there's only 24 hours in a day. So what do you choose to spend your time on?
Yeah, again, I go back to what I said before. We have our favorites. Like I favor backend over front end, so I concentrate on that. And then I look for things that are going to be relevant for me. If I have a job, I would probably go with those first. But then if it's something for me, like a side project that I want to build on the side, is there something that I want to learn? Then I'll try that. And if not, I'll just stick with whatever I see that it's going to be more relevant for the industry. Again, we have sources of what's relevant in the industry that we all mentioned, like the newsletters, Twitter, the conferences. So I pick one of those. But again, I think it's going to be different for everybody, because depending on their situation, they might need a particular technology just because that's what's going to be on their next project or on their team. So I don't have a definite answer that's going to fit all. Sorry.
No, that's a good answer. Brooke, what about you? What criteria do you use to choose?
Whatever Joe Eames says is good.
Friends. That's a good one.
No,
Friends, I like that.
I kind of have to agree with Louise there. I'm going to go back a little bit to what I said on my last answer and just say, when you go around to these meetups or even at conferences, like you pointed out, Joe, I think, though, it does take a little bit of homework because, there's 1,000 million people on Twitter and on these communities, and it kind of becomes like, who do you listen to? Whose opinion really is one that has some backing to it? And I think you have to be careful with not just listening to someone that you necessarily like, because there's a lot of likable people in development, but you really need to find people who are true experts in the field and start to follow them. And that's where I said newsletters, because you can handpick the newsletters that you subscribe to. It's not just anybody who says something, and you kind of go, oh, well, that sounds good. I like that person, so I'll do what they do. It's if you're following a newsletter, or if you really follow like a couple of people in particular who are proven experts on a topic, I think that's where you just do your homework, find out who those people are, and follow their guidance and direction on that. So that's kind of what I do, is just find some people who I really respect and who I know have a very strong track record, and then I follow their advice. But then friends too, respected friends.
Sarah, what about you?
So my team at Auth0 is my source. So we'll talk about what is up and coming, and we may see different things on Twitter or in newsletters or on other blogs, and we just talk and figure it out. So one that wasn't on my radar was RxJS, and my coworker, Sam Julien, he actually recommended getting into RxJS. And so my article was React plus RxJS, and I learned a lot about reactive programming. And I don't think I would have dived into that had my coworker not suggested it to me, and my friend, So I think the people I surround myself with are my go-to when picking what to learn next.
Awesome. Chris?
Sure. I've gotten to a point where it's like, I want to put in the time only if it helps me be more productive in the long run. So like Svelte, I just keep picking on Svelte because it's the latest one, right? It was cool to just experiment with, but do I see myself using it anytime soon? Like in switching out all of my React and Angular stuff? I don't think so. So that's kind of probably not going to lean that way any further, aside from like some one-off tutorials. I guess I'm getting into like things to learn, right? But if it makes like development more productive in the long run, then I'll for sure put my time towards it as far as like what to learn. So I know this is kind of like leaning into the last question of what to learn. Am I allowed to?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, then we'll talk about it later. But it is stuff that I feel will, in the long run, just help save time.
Right. Cool. For me, I think some of the criteria that I use as far as what to learn is I look for things that are starting to become more popular than just one person talking about it. Of course, the criteria that, each different person has different criteria as far as what actually is important for them to learn in general, right? If you're working for a company, the things that will help that company are obviously things that should be towards the top of your list. For everybody, just things that you're interested in are valuable to learn regardless of whether or not they ever mean another dollar in your bank account, right? And as several people have said, there's lots of stuff that's just should be learned by a lot of people. But for me and for Chris as well, where we're in the education, we need to worry about what do people want to be educated on, right? So that's our business, is finding things that people want to be educated on. And so training them. Luis, right? You're in the same place. So we need to worry about that. So looking at things that people are asking for education about, those are things that that I want to keep an eye out on. So that's some of my criteria, is what are people talking about? And I also think that I spend a bit of time of, well, what do I want people to know? Because, I have a voice and reach, and sometimes rather than, Svelte 3 just dropped, sure, we can talk about Svelte 3 and maybe worry about putting out some tutorials for that. But also, like, what are things that people should really be thinking about that they're forgetting in this mad rush of, hey, the latest, version of React just dropped, and now I have to convert everything to hooks today, right? So those sorts of things, I think, are criteria that I use for myself personally, is stuff that looks like it's not just going to be a flash in the pan. So, all right, we're going to go on into our 2 core questions, probably what everybody who's been listening has been waiting on. And we're going to split this up into 2 different questions. The first question is, what do you personally want to learn in 2019? Right. And the next 6 months, we got 6 months left of the year. What do you personally have on your list? Whether that's 1, 3, let's not list 12 items, but what do you personally have on your list? And then after that, we'll have our final question, which is, what do you think everybody, developers in general, or at least developers who are in a certain category, what would you recommend to other developers to learn in 2019? and what it might be different on that list versus the things that you specifically yourself want to learn. So our question is, what do you specifically want to learn in 2019? Brooke, do you want to start us off?
Oh, man. Well, I have a personal goal to learn Rails, but really more than that, kind of goes back to what Sarah and I were talking about earlier. And just that I want to go back and really focus on the fundamentals again. I feel like there was this huge part of me just going through boot camp that I'm the type of person that I do get competitive, not necessarily with other people. Like I am, but I don't really let other people know it, if that makes sense. I'm not openly competitive, but I am inwardly. So if other people know something, I just feel this tremendous responsibility to feel like I have to know everything as well, because I want to be able to do my job effectively. It's not that I'm trying to be better than everyone. It's just that I want to be effective at my job. So going through boot camp was really hard for me. I should take my own advice and not compare myself to others, but just I felt like I had to know everything. And so I came out of boot camp just being too scattered and not really having mastered one language or one framework. So for me, I think it's really important to go back and just totally master the basic fundamentals of development again before I really start putting that pressure on myself to go and, learn any certain kind of framework. But Rails is a big one for me. I've recently been discovering like CSS Subgrid and CSS Houdini, CSS Sticky. So just some of those, like the styling components, things like that. Those are my goals though. So definitely like Rails for the back end, and then just more of the fundamentals for everything else.
Cool. Chris?
Mine's kind of a cheat, I guess. A lot of my stuff, especially going full time on Scotch, is I want to kind of, especially since I'm trying to turn it more into a business than just a blog kind of thing, is that whole marketing aspect of creating a business is more newer to me. So I'm kind of leaning to that kind of growing a business side of things than the development side of things. I know that's kind of like off topic, I guess, but so that's kind of what I want to learn. As far as development goes, I'm kind of leaning to like, let me just keep my development status where it is right now. I just want to have my current knowledge, and hopefully nothing crazy comes out new that I have to learn, but I kind of want to just hang out. And then the second part was, what should everyone else learn? Is that right?
We'll do that in a separate question, separate round.
Okay.
So right now it's just, what do you want to learn in 2018?
Sure. Yeah. Mostly, I don't know, growing myself and the business side of things, like the Zen side of things, as opposed to everything that comes with the development that I think a lot of people don't focus on. I feel like that's a cheat answer, but that's what I'm going with.
Okay. Luis?
Yeah, for me I want to learn more about functional programming and design, because I come from a background of strong OOP roots, and I'm learning slowly how much you can simplify your code if you think a little more functional. And it's scary in there, but that's what I have my sights right now. I'm looking at, experimenting with things like Elm, looking at even Clojure. If it just didn't have to have installed Java, that would be awesome. But I'm looking into that. Functional programming concepts as a different paradigm to make my programs and my code simpler to work with. And then design, because doesn't mean that I'm going to be an expert designer. I'm not changing roles. It's just so that my designs are cleaner, and I am more intentional when I build a piece of UI of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, the colors, the fonts, the space, the white space, all of that. So that's where my focus is personally this year.
Cool. Sarah, how about you?
So to kind of go off of my last answer, RxJS, learning that was a lot of people would tell me, oh yeah, it'll click. And then it finally clicked, but I feel like it's clicked at a low level. So I definitely want to dive more into RxJS and get more of those clicks as I get into it more. But yeah, definitely RxJS, and get better at JavaScript, because it is so dynamic. You can dive so deep into it. So definitely get into that more. But RxJS for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So for me, my list is the following. I want to learn Docker this year. I want to learn Svelte and React this year. And then I'm with Chris. I do want to get a little bit better at marketing, the business side of things as well. So put that one on there is that. And that's it. So Docker, React, Svelte, and marketing. Those are on my list. So final question, not even a bonus round, is what do you think other people, including, potentially yourself, but what do you think in general developers should learn in 2019? Your top 1 or 2 items that you would highly recommend that developers should learn if they haven't learned this already. Luis, start us off.
I would say GraphQL. That's one thing that should be in everybody's radar. And then the second, I'm going to make it a wild card, and I'm going to say learn a new paradigm. If you're a functional programmer, learn about object-oriented. So just pick another language. If you've been working with something with strong types, look for something more dynamic, like maybe Python or something. That would be my recommendation. So GraphQL and something that is different from what you've been doing.
I was going to actually say that as well, Louise. I was going to say the GraphQL. I'm hearing a lot about that. And also Gatsby. I hear a ton of people really talking about how much they love it. Have not heard anybody really, expressing any kind of disappointment with it. So I definitely think Gatsby is another one. And then I'm going to have to say, if you're in the React realm, I would throw in hooks. It's been out now in the fall. We're coming up on a year, but I think that it's definitely something that is going to just help you be a better developer within React. So I'm going to say hooks as well.
Awesome. Sarah, what about you?
For new developers, people that are getting into it, I definitely recommend getting good at GitHub, because that's what we all use. So definitely GitHub for newbies, focus on getting good at that. And then being that I'm in the React world, TypeScript, because I know in Angular it's the language, but in React it's getting more popular, but I would definitely say TypeScript.
Cool. Chris?
Yeah, GraphQL is a big one for sure. I feel TypeScript is a big one, especially now that you see TypeScript. It kind of like leaned on it was very big in the Angular community, it is very big. And I feel that it's starting to spread to the React and Vue side of things. So I think TypeScript for sure, not just because of like the safety stuff you get, but I'm a really big fan of self-documenting code. And that saves so much time in the long run, I feel, especially during development. So I think TypeScript is a big one. Yeah, TypeScript and GraphQL are up there. And I like what you said earlier, Joe, it's you kind of lean towards the things that have already gained traction, right? And there's already a huge community around both of those technologies. So I think like now is a good time to jump in. Yeah. And to amend my previous answer, what do I want to learn? Something I've heard a lot about but don't know anything about is Reason ML. So I'll just throw that in there.
Cool. Is that everybody but me? Brick, you got yours, right? Okay. So I'll finish this up. Things that I think everybody should learn if they haven't. It should be on the top of their list. Something technical, I'll throw Rust in there. I keep hearing a lot of awesome stuff about Rust, so I want to put that on the list. But code craftsmanship, that I think is something that people should absolutely spend time learning. And that this is as true 30 years ago as it is today, and it will be absolutely true in 30 years. We had an awesome guest on earlier on, Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin. He came on to talk about print books. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. Great episode. But one of the things that he said that really struck me was the important stuff is the stuff that doesn't change, right? So learning code craftsmanship, things like object-oriented programming and, what it takes to make a good program, solid principles and patterns and practices and things like code reviews and pairing and test-driven development and unit testing and just all that effective stuff, agile, all those sorts of things that you should be spending time worrying about and trying to become better and writing more readable code. And then the final thing that I will list will be, which is good for every developer, is improving your emotional IQ, emotional intelligence, and incorporating mindfulness into that. Like, it's a hard job. We get stressed just like any other job. We have bosses, we have deadlines, we have a lot of stuff that comes at us. Then we go home into our home life, and we have to deal with stuff there, and being able to be more balanced and even keel and deal with the difficulties that life throws at you. I will list that stuff as well. I've been doing these regular emails on Friday nights out to our Thinkster email list about things that are related to emotional intelligence. And I find it's pretty hilarious because I'm emailing all these developers. And when I email development stuff, occasionally one of them will reply mostly to say, hey, I found a bug and whatever you put together, or you didn't talk about this particular aspect I wanted to talk about. But when I talk about things about emotional intelligence, there's all the feedback is, wow, you really hit a note that matters to me today. You really said something that was meaningful to me. Thanks for sending these. I love reading these emails. So yeah, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, learning to incorporate those practices into your life to make your life more full and have an easier time bringing happiness and joy into your life while you're writing code.
Hey,
go ahead.
I just wanted to, first of all, give a shameless plug there, because as someone who is somewhat newer to the industry, I find a lot of value in Joe's Friday, we call them our Friday night emails, or like Joe's thoughts. But if you are interested in those, for sure go on to thinkster.io and just subscribe to the newsletters there, because there's a lot of value in what he shares. I think just a lot of knowledge from someone who's been in the industry for a long time. And, there definitely is something to be said for what he says in those. But also, I have a question too, because Joe, I like how you brought up Uncle Bob's quote about, like really focusing on things that haven't changed a lot. But just as I guess a tip or some advice for people who are newer to the industry, how do you know what those are going to be? I mean, you can obviously look back and see some of the things that have already been around for a while, and you can see that those are ones that aren't going away. But how do you know, like for some of these newer technologies, newer frameworks, languages, is there some kind of way that you would judge which ones will be around for a while and which ones are more or less just a fad?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that's a great question for the entire panel to jump in on as well, right? Like, how do we know? I feel like there's certain things that the stuff that was developed 30, 40 years ago, patterns and practices, things that luminaries in our industry have come up with. Those are the types of things that, you look at who came up with them and when, and they're not so much languages as much as they are techniques and practices and patterns. I don't know, for Luis, Sarah, Chris, how would you guys answer that question?
I would say I don't know exactly what they are, but I can tell you how you can start like shedding the load and say, this is the stuff that is not. Newer technologies are anything that is related to a framework or a tooling or a language. Those are not the things that we're talking about. What we're talking about is architecture, principles and practices. What is it that you can bring and you can teach or learn about without having to tie it to a framework or to a technology? So if you can find those properties on something, that's probably something you want to care about. And of course, Joe said, we respect things that have been around for a while. So if you're looking at patterns and you see this really cool pattern that just came out a couple of weeks, maybe you want to wait to see if that's going to be a pattern that is going to be respected. But when you look at something like REST, like RESTful, right? RESTful APIs. Well, the relational model, understanding those is going to take you a long way. It's going to fast forward you, and it's going to last you for a long time, because that's not something that just came out last week. This is something that has been proven in different implementations, in different languages, and with different tooling. But the core concepts, when the lie behind those are still good. So those are some ideas.
Chris, Sarah, any thoughts?
Well, one thing that this just brought up for me that I guess will triple amend my one answer of what do I want to learn. This is what's fun about development, right? It just keeps coming up and new stuff always keeps popping up. But one of the things that came up here for me that isn't really new of a concept is state machines, which David Korshid has released a package called XState, and I just really like that idea of state machines. But that is not a new concept. Apparently, it was like 70s, 80s, or whatever it was. But if you're looking on like, what I found interesting is when you Google for something, like if you Google for state machines, you're not going to find XState, the new like JavaScript library, right? You're going to find like a Wikipedia article on, architecture. So yeah, finite state machines. And I think that if you search for something and don't add JavaScript to it, like finite state machines without JavaScript, you'll find like the architecture articles, and then you add JavaScript to it and you'll probably find XState. So I don't know, just Google for it. See if there's an architecture article.
Awesome. Sarah, any final thoughts?
Just to like echo on what Luis and Chris are saying. Nothing much more to add, I guess.
Cool. All right. Well, I think with that, we'll wrap up. This has actually been a little bit of a longer episode for us. So hopefully the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. This is really fun. Luis is giving me the hand signal. Was that the cut it out, or is the time to go? Wrap it up?
It's me saying that once the editor finishes doing the chopping, we're probably going to be with
Yeah. Yeah. So the one last question I always like to let people or ask people on our panel is, if there was one thing you wanted to tell a friend about something they didn't know, and you want to make sure your friend knew about something that was super cool, whether that's a board game, that's my usual picks, or some new technology, or a new tool, or anything interesting, what would that be? So a lot of other shows do this. They call them picks or stuff like that. But something you would tell a friend if your friend didn't know about that thing. And Brooke, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So I found this new website that has me really, really excited. And I guess it's kind of perfect for what we've been talking about here and how we've just been saying, like, at least I'm saying go back to the fundamentals and really master those before you move on. So one thing that I really want to I want to know all the ins and outs of JavaScript. So there's this website called javascript30.com. And it's really cool because it's like a 30-day challenge, and it's free, but you go on there and every day you're given a new challenge, and you're supposed to do one new JavaScript little exercise every day for 30 days. So I just think it sounds really fun. I think it looks like a great way just to brush up on those skills and try to master that JavaScript language. So yeah, it's JavaScript30, like the numbers 30.com.
Awesome. Luis?
This comes from the pain of trying to teach data modeling to a class. I used to kind of lean on my Windows computer because I could use the SQL Server stuff, but now I'm forced to teach on a Mac. So I needed to find something that when, cross-platform. So I found this web application called dbdesigner.net. And what I really like about them is you could just start designing as a guest. You don't even have to sign up. They do have a sign-up plan and all that. They have a free tier too. But I like the UI. It's really simple to use. And if you want to data model something real quick, I think that's a good place to go. dbdesigner.net.
Cool. Sarah?
To piggyback the JavaScript thing, my favorite resource for JavaScript is actually Chris's course on JavaScript. I actually really enjoyed it. So everyone should check out his course on JavaScript. Also, a random one, my favorite book is The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. Definitely recommend that to everyone. It's about the Olympic rowing team from Seattle. So yeah, those two things, Chris's JavaScript and The Boys in the Boat.
Awesome. Chris, what about you?
I'm going to go with two things. One thing I've been wanting to say, all this talk, but I keep forgetting, is that a lot of times us as developers, we kind of have like this, I don't know what to call it, but you know that time at conferences or when you're talking to other developers and you say, hey, have you heard of XYZ? And it's like the cool new thing. It's like almost a shameful thing to say, no, I haven't heard of it, And I just want to say, like, that's totally fine. I've said that many times. And as long as you're just like, hey, no, I haven't heard of that thing. Please tell me about it. Everyone's usually like really cool about the situation. But I just don't want people to get into a place where they like are ashamed to say, no, I'm not up to date with whatever's new. Right. So that's one thing. And then two, the website that just launched from SpaceX is starlink.com. And I don't know what they do with their JavaScript or whatever, but it's like a giant canvas tag. And it's just like a planet with a bunch of little satellites flowing around it. And you can like click and drag the globe and move it around. So that's just a really cool development thing. starlink.com.
Hey, Chris.
Mm.
How do people get to your JavaScript tutorial?
Oh, yeah. So if you just go to Scotch and search for JavaScript course, and then another thing, which is kind of new for me, is I was told that any of our like free courses we should put on YouTube. I don't know how I feel about it, but I think I'm going to put it on YouTube just to test out the YouTube waters. So follow on YouTube.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So for me, I'm going to pick my favorite recent board game, which is Clank. So if you're looking for an awesome board game to play, look for a board game called Clank, CLANK. Super fun, great mechanics. There's a few expansions out. There's a new one coming out for it as well. But that's been one of my favorite board games to play is Clank.
Is it like a Dungeons and Dragons type thing? What is it?
It's a little bit more like your typical Euro-style board game. So the premise is you're thieves going down into the dragon's lair to steal stuff. A little bit more like The Hobbit, I guess. You're stealing relics from the dragon, and if you make too much noise and the dragon comes out and attacks people, and so you all have to go down in, move around this map, grab a relic and come back up, and there's timers involved, and it's just super fun, and there's all these rules about how to move, and it's kind of a deck builder game. So you start with a deck of cards and you buy more cards to add to your deck as you're moving around. So if you've played deck builder games, it's kind of got that mechanic. And then there's a variation, one of the expansions, you're stealing from the mummy and the pyramid, and another one you're stealing from some monster under the sea. And then there's a space version where you're in space stealing from the bad guy's ship. And then there's an expansion to that, and it's really fun. I really enjoy the game. It's relatively simple to learn. It plays in like an hour and a half-ish once you kind of know what you're doing. It plays up to 5 people, so it's a great game night game to play with your significant other or some friends. Really just, I really have enjoyed it. It's been absolutely one of my favorites for quite a while now. So that'll be it for my choice. And that'll wrap up our podcast as well today. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Sarah, Chris, for taking your time. And we will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.